This is the beginning of the build series of my latest RC acquisition, a Traxxas SUMMiT. This is a bucket list truck for me, something I've always wanted, and I had the opportunity to trade away my Slash 4x4 for it. Now when I got this SUMMiT, it was a functioning RC, but I could tell it had been neglected in maintenance. As far as I can tell, a screw has never been turned on this truck, and it is a quite old model. It's probably one of the first models sold, and for that reason it really is due for a bit of maintenance. Now, if you're not familiar with how big the SUMMiT is, hopefully you're familiar with a 1/10 scale trail truck. This is a pretty standard trail truck tire. It's what came on my Axial SCX-10 Dingo. It's 4.3 inches tall. This is the SUMMiT tire, and as you can tell, there is a huge difference. My main reason for wanting a SUMMiT is snow. With these huge tires, it is going to be a beast in the snow. Combine that with the locking differentials front and rear and the 2-speed transfer case, this vehicle can perform in all sorts of terrains. Fast, slow, crawling, bashing. It'll do it all pretty decent. And that's exactly what I'm going to be using it for. As you can tell, I've already blown apart the front end, just trying to familiarize myself vaguely with how this vehicle works. And I figured now was a good time to go ahead and turn on the camera and start showing you the process. I'm just cleaning up a couple parts by the front differential and its housing because it was pretty sandy, and then I'm going to be cracking into the differential and replacing the bearings and just continuing to go through it from there. So without further ado, let's get started. Now this is that sandy differential and differential housing that I was talking about. And as you can see, there's a fair bit of sand in there. I've already cleaned off most of it from the differential housing. And all I'm doing to do this is using a small flat-bladed screwdriver to get the bulk of the sand off, and using a paper towel wet with WD-40 to wipe it out of the crevices. Now that I've got all those components cleaned up good enough, it's time to go ahead and crack into the differential. Looks like I'm going to be needing a 2mm and a 2.5mm hex driver for this. I'm going to go ahead and start by first disconnecting this drive shaft. On most drive shafts, you'll find that there is a set screw on one part of it. You can go ahead and undo that set screw. In fact, I think this might actually be a tire pin here. Once you unthread it enough, you can pull it out and you'll see half of it is just a shaft. And that's going to lock your drive shaft to your differential. Go ahead and set that piece of hardware to the side. I've got a magnetic tray here with one of everything in it. It's a big mess, but don't worry, we'll sort that out later. And your drive shaft will slide off real easy. That's in perfectly good shape, so I'm going to go ahead and reuse that. There's actually still some sand packed in a few of these screw heads, so I'm going to take a very small tool. Probably shouldn't use a hex driver for this because you could ruin the tip, but this one has literally zero purpose. I don't know why I own it. It is 0.05 inches. Because what you don't want to do is have it halfway packed with sand, and then you can only get your driver halfway in, and then your chances of stripping it out are much higher. That's reasonably clean now. We can go ahead and start to crack some of these bolts loose. Oh, they're a little bit tight. I was able to get it. Appear to be 4 of them, 2 facing one way and 4 facing the other way and 2 facing this way. Just going to go ahead and pull these out real quick and put them into my hardware magnetic bowl. If you want a magnetic bowl like this one's actually from Harbor Freight. I think it's about $4, and it is super great. Not everything in here is actually magnetic, so I'm not going to turn it upside down to demonstrate it. With how cheap those are, you can have one bowl for each of your projects, so you can keep all your hardware organized. You don't have a big mix of Axial and Traxxas screws from 3 or 4 different trucks you have to sort through when it's time to put things back together. So far it looks like all these screws are the same size. It should be pretty easy to figure out how this goes back together. As far as tools that I'm using, this is an Integy driver. I just got a basic Integy tool set a few years ago, and these smaller hex drivers, the 1.5 and 2mm ones, did strip out pretty quickly. But the 2.5, the nut drivers, the Phillips, and the flathead have held up perfectly fine, and they've been pretty good tools, especially for their price. For the smaller nuts, or smaller hex drivers, the 1.5 and 2 millimeter, I went with the MIP, which are fantastic. Haven't had the tiniest bit of an issue. The 1.5 I've had for a few years and haven't stripped out a single tip on it. This has been a fantastic tool, and I've only actually stripped out, I believe, one set screw using it, and that was a set screw that was already kind of buggered up already. And I have my first look at the inside of a Traxxas locking differential. Something I've been looking forward to, basically since the SUMMiT came out, staring at it in pages of RC Car Action magazine. Oh boy, that needs a service. So in here it is very dry. There is no sign of grease at all. Luckily the gear looks pretty good, so I don't think we've got any damage on anything in here. Definitely going to be putting new bearings in it, just to be safe. And the littlest bit of grease is showing on this cap, and it looks watery, so yeah, it's a good thing this got serviced. If I didn't service this, it would have only been a matter of time before we started seeing some real damage. I'm going to pop out this gear set with the locker mechanism. Oh, locker mechanism went ahead and fell out. And so in a differential, there's two gears, which you may be already aware of. There's the bigger one, which is connected to the out drives. That's called the ring gear. Then you have the smaller one, which connects to your drive shaft, and that's called the pinion gear. In full size, when you're buying a set of gears, they call it a ring and pinion set for your axle. And that's why. That's what they're called. I'm going to go ahead and pop out the two bearings that are in here. You've got one on the inside and one on the outside. And it looks like we have a total of 3 bearings holding the locker assembly into the housing. I'm going to pop all those off, find their corresponding matches in my new set of bearings, as well as clean this up a little bit so I can be ready to put new grease on it. And of course not to forget the very small bearing on the shifter. Now before we get too much further, now seems like a good time to go over all the parts I got for the build. I've still got a few more coming in the mail, but this should be enough to get things going for today. I got REBUiLD kits for both differentials. That includes shifter forks, seals, and yeah, that's about it. But should be great to make sure the differentials don't leak and the shifters are working properly. I also got some new differential fluid. The instruction manual called for 100,000 weight, but I actually went for 50,000 weight because that's what my hobby shop had in stock that was closest. And I figured a little lighter weight would actually be pretty good, because if I want the differentials to act more like a limited slip, I would just lock it up. So I'm not too worried about it being a little lower weight. It's going to perform perfectly well for what I want. I also got new short and long drive shafts. This vehicle has a long one and a short one on each side, front and back. So you've got long ones diagonal and short ones diagonal due to the shape of the locking differential. And I did that because the old drive shafts had super dry boots and they were pretty much on the verge of tearing. And they were also relatively affordable at just $8 a pair. It's a lot cheaper than I expected it was going to be. In addition to the torn drive shaft boots, all of the boots around these pivot balls were totally destroyed, either totally brittle or torn to shreds or entirely missing. So I ordered a set of those, and those should be here soon. In addition, I ordered a set of the chrome pieces for the light buckets on the front bumper and the roof, because this front bumper is pretty tarnished and it just doesn't look good. Obviously looks aren't the most important thing, but for a couple dollars I figured it would be nice to make the rig look pretty. Also picked up a new rear bumper assembly in order to get this bracket, this brace, because it is the only thing which is physically snapped on the SUMMiT. Also picked up a new antenna for the radio. That's right, this thing has the good old-fashioned 27 megahertz radio, which I'm going to be keeping for now, simply because replacing that radio system would be pretty expensive. I know I can pick up a FlySky unit and it's less expensive, and that's probably what I'm going to do. But for the time being, this will get me up and running, and it's worked fine for decades, so there's no reason it can't continue to work. Also picked up some tools, since this is the first larger scale RC I have, including the 17mm driver for the tire nuts. Obviously I can use regular tools for that. I used a socket wrench to take the tires off the front, but that way it's a little bit too easy in my opinion to over torque and break things. Plus I don't like to have to buy real tools to put in my RC box. I don't want to have to share my automotive set of tools with my RC collection. So I'd rather have stuff for each, and this was pretty affordable. In addition, I got this multi-tool, which includes a bit for tightening the caps on the pivot balls. You can also use a 5mm hex, but I didn't want to have to buy a whole new hex set just for this truck. I also have one set of Traxxas battery connectors because this truck requires 2 batteries, so I need to get my hands on another one of these, which is proving pretty hard. But I want to be able to use Dean's connectors because that's my preferred connector. And I also don't want to cut the wires on this ESC because I'm pretty sure it could have at least some resale value, or maybe I could use it in the future for different projects. And I just don't want to go cutting stuff up. That's probably what I'm going to end up having to do, just because I can't find these. My local hobby shop owner actually told me that Traxxas no longer sells female plugs, new style or old style, ever since they started doing the ID batteries. And the most expensive part was a full fast eddy bearing kit. I love fast eddy bearings. They work fantastic, they last a long time, and these kits are super complete. This actually has 45 bearings in it. So no, not cheap, but very worth it and very necessary if you want to make sure your vehicle's going to last. Now, if you've noticed, as I've been working, I've been including a lot of information that's extra on the side. That's because I know a lot of people are kind of nervous to get into the hobby, or not so much get into the hobby, but to work on their trucks. And that's, you know, RCs and other things too. And it's one of those things, it's actually not really that bad once you get into it. It's a bit intimidating. But if you take your time and do your research ahead of time, for example, on the Traxxas website, you can find exploded diagrams of your vehicle and of all sorts of different parts of it. So once you get it apart, you should be able to figure out how to get it back together fairly easily. Now, I'm about ready to crack open this differential. I noticed it didn't start leaking when I set it down, so I'm guessing there's not a drop of fluid in here actually. Wow. So again, it's really important to do your maintenance when you buy a used RC. This one's pretty old, so I knew it would need work, but even ones that are relatively new may need work. This differential seal in particular is actually torn in a few spots. That's really ripped up, wow. This thing was extremely overdue for service. This seal's not too bad. I'm going to be throwing it away anyways, because I have new ones. I'm not going to risk this going back together and then leaking. Hopefully I can find a better way to get the differential out of this truck, but so far all I've discovered is to take the entire front end apart, and that is not a pleasant service. On my slash 4x4 that I had, servicing that was actually extremely easy. Yeah, that's torn completely, and it's actually about to come apart in several more places. This was junk. The rebuild kit cost me US dollars, $6. That's pretty standard for a diff rebuild kit. So there's not really any excuse not to go ahead and get it done. You may have to buy yourself some fluids, but bottles of fluids and such usually last for a pretty long time, so you shouldn't have to worry about that. Just going to finish cleaning up this ring gear a little. It's clean enough. Now I'm going to take the guts out of this differential. Differentials have what are called spider gears inside, and these spider gears are able to walk around each other and allow the two sides of the differential to spin at different rates. There's the carrier. This actually reminds me a lot of my slash 4x4 diff. I wish I had an extra one here to compare the size of the parts side by side, but I'm thinking things are actually quite similar here. The internals of the differential don't actually look any beefier. Now this plastic cup is also included in the rebuild kit because it's the only part of the differential that's plastic, and you could strip out these screws. And if you strip out these screws, the ring gear will come loose and go wonky. You strip out your ring gear. It's an expensive piece of kit. So it's always a good idea to just replace these parts. So this, straight in the bin. One more seal in here coming off this other ring spider gear. Again, right in the bin. Just going to wipe the majority of the old grease off because it's more just black schmutz now than actual grease or oil. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's stringy like hot cheese on a pizza. It is disgusting. Extremely overdue service. While this vehicle may have worked had I just simply put batteries in and used it, it wouldn't have lasted. Before long, this lack of lubrication would have caused parts wear, and there would have been some pretty expensive parts needing to be replaced. Right now I'm able to replace cheap service parts, and it's not too bad. So now that's all clean, I'm going to take my razor blade and open up some of these new parts and start pairing up what I've got so I can replace everything that can be replaced. Looks like these metal tabs also get replaced. The ones I have here don't look to be in bad condition. So I'm actually just going to put the brand new ones in them, but I'm going to keep the old ones as spares in case I ever lose one of these while doing a differential rebuild, especially on the trail or something. No reason to get rid of those, but it just happens to include some new ones, so that's nice. A very small shim here, which I didn't notice coming out of my truck. So I'm going to take a little bit of a closer look to see where that might be. So I've got this out to the shift assembly exploded view. And as you can see, we've got our shifter fork assembly here. That's the ring gear here. All the way over here is the locker mechanism. So it's all spread out right like that. We also have a diagram showing the correct orientation of these little metal tabs with the spider gears when you assemble it into the plastic housing. And I don't see mention of that small Teflon spacer. Oh, do I? Yes, I do. There it is, right here. You can see on this spider gear on this side, we just have the small blue seal. On this side, we also have that exact same seal, but there's another ring, and that other ring is this little Teflon washer. So that's exactly where that goes. I'm going to leave this out to make sure I get the orientation correct. It looks like it goes on the side that has the locker assembly. I also didn't pay attention when I took it apart, but you can see that these two spider gears have different length output shafts. I believe the longer one is going to go on the locker side because it also has to pass through the locker mechanism. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and take the cross brace and insert the pin into it, which went flying across the table. Put these two spider gears on it. Put the two metal tabs on it, and I again didn't pay attention to which way it came out, but I believe the flat side goes against the gear because it has a beveled side and a flat side. I'm going to put the flat side against the gear because that seems to be what the picture is showing. Kind of hard to tell. I am going to go ahead and, before I drop this in the housing, I'm going to install the ring gear that goes on the bottom. Remember, Teflon washer, blue rubber seal, which you don't want to roll that. If you roll it, it's not going to seal properly. You want to slide it down carefully, and it'll pop into a groove at the base of the shaft. I'm going to go ahead and drop that into the differential. This might be an acceptable time to use some Team Associated green slime, but personally, I just like to use that for shocks. Less worried about the differential. Now I can go ahead and drop this in, and the instructions say to do it with the tabs facing curved side down. So I'm going to go ahead and insert that like so, making sure everything's lined up and fitting properly. If my hands are all over in the way, it's kind of hard to get that to sit in there. Here we go. Make sure the gears are seated, which they were not, so now this can fit in a little better. And the gears are now engaged properly, so that is installed correctly. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and lay the new seal over top. So razor blade. I don't even know how much of this I'm keeping in. If you're seeing this right now, hello, this is a long video. Thumbs up button would be cool. Maybe comment, give your input. You can hit the thumbs down button. Some constructive criticism might help. Although to be fair, most of my videos have lots of down votes. Oh, I know why. It was intentionally bad, or it was just plain bad. If it was just plain bad, it's probably private by now. Wow, this stuff is goopy. I have another bottle of diff fluid. And frankly, I don't know much of anything about diff fluid because I never had a car that actually used it until my Slash 4x4. And I was just guessing with that, and I bought, I don't remember what it was less than 10,000 weight. It was extremely low weight. I didn't realize that at the time. So this is kind of cool to me. Just gonna nip the tip. You can make jokes about that in the comment section. Squish the tip a little because it's deformed. Nobody likes a deformed tip. I'm actually going to open it up a little bit more so I can get some more fluid flow. No reason to make this diff filling process slow and arduous. You can go ahead and thread that cap on there. Now it's time to fill up the differential. Luckily, differentials are a lot less picky than a shock absorber when it comes to filling it with fluid. Just get some in there. Probably fill it up. I'm going to go to right when it starts to cover the top of this cross beam. There should be a good amount. Wow, that is really thick stuff. Wow. That's incredible. I probably should have put some in before I inserted these gears. The stuff I had before was like water. I can see why it handled a little poorly in the dirt. It had extremely lightweight fluid in it. Wow. Hey, I'm learning right here with you. I have been doing RC stuff for, gosh, let me think. It's going to be 13 years coming up this Christmas. My first RC car when I was 8 years old, it's a Maya Hornet. That was a cool car. I'd like to get another one of those one day. No, they're not fast. No, you can't do big jumps with them, but it's simple, cheap fun. I think I need a little more fluid in there. Really want to make sure this is lubricated well because these gears are going to be spinning real fast when your diffs are unlocked and you're scrambling to get up a steep hill. So now we're going to go ahead and take our other spider gear with an output shaft. Hopefully this doesn't spill everywhere, geez. Should have done this ahead of time. Get your other blue O-ring on there. Again, careful not to roll it. Slide it down until it gets to the groove at the base. Then we'll go ahead and install that into the ring gear. Maybe. Come on. Here we go. Now I can align the ring gear with the holes in the housing here. Go ahead and start installing screws. A good trick to make sure this is installed square is to go diagonally and don't fully tighten any of the screws until the rest of them are installed. That way you can seat the gear down in a somewhat even fashion. In the same way that you'd tighten the lug nuts on a car tire. It's going to be exciting to have this step done because it'll be actually this is the first part of the SUMMiT that I've put together. Finally starting to come together and it's going to be pretty cool. I'm getting excited. Definitely getting excited. Don't want to overdo these. Another thing is when you're installing especially new plastic parts, installing the screws actually does heat up the plastic a good bit. If you ever install particularly big screws or particularly long ones, you will notice the plastic heats up a fair amount. And when the plastic's warm, it's soft. So as you tighten those screws down to their final torque, it can be really easy to strip out that soft plastic. I actually feel this is a little bit warm right now. So now I've got things kind of tight. I'm going to set it to the side and let it cool off for a few minutes before I give it a final snug up to reduce the risk of stripping it out. There's that. Any more little ones hiding in there? Nope. So I'm going to have to find this really little one, which I believe this is where it's useful to have the inventory pulled up so you can know if there's any similar bearing sizes to look out for, but I don't think there are. I'm going to gamble and say there aren't. Probably are. That might bite me later. Oh well. Just going to go ahead and put them side by side and pair them up. Maybe even take them off and lay them on top of each other, but I'm not going to do that. I'm pretty confident that's the right size. So I'm going to take the new shifter fork that came with the REBUiLD kit in my new bearing, slide them together, and that slides on and off super smooth, which is funny because this doesn't seem to want to come off. That's on there good. So that was wearing in a way that I'm not too pleased with. Set that aside by these junk bearings. These big ones are pretty obvious what they are. There's not too many of those. And then these ones, these three, are actually all pretty standard size. I believe it's 5 by 11 by 4. You'll see that size in RCs all the time. These ones are a little bit smaller than that. These ones are a little bit thicker than that. I'm guessing it's one of these, so there's probably a lot of them in there, or it could be both of these. There might just be a huge number of them. I'm going to crack into this tube first and see what I've got. Inner and outer diameter look the same, thickness is the same. These are it. Like I said, these are extremely common bearings in RC. My two-wheel drive Traxxas models use them, my Slash 4x4 used them, this huge SUMMiT uses them, my SCX10 uses them. They're probably the most common bearing in 10th scale RCs. There's one more larger bearing here. Let's see, it looks like this one. And that's exactly right, it's that one. Now here's the fun part, grease. The grease I use is marine grease. Doesn't matter who makes it really. This one's by Lucas Oil. It's meant to go in a big grease gun, so it's a kind of funny looking container. The point is, this stuff is fantastic in water applications, which if your RC is waterproof, let's be real, it's going to go in water. The temptation's too strong. This stuff is great because it doesn't really wash away with water. I've had rigs that have been really abused and the grease can turn all kinds of gross colors, but it's still stuck to those gears, lubricating them as best as possible. Now you don't want to overdo your grease because that's going to add a lot of extra resistance to your truck. In a trail truck, slightly less of an issue, although it can lead to heat. But something like this that might get some speed going through it at some point, you don't want to overdo it. So I've actually probably got too much grease on my finger here, but I'm going to go ahead and lubricate the ring gear. So now that I've got grease in there, I'm going to spin it up real quick, make sure I get that spread around a bit while I'm watching it to make sure everything's good. And it seems good. A lot of this stuff you can only get from experience, so I recommend that you just get in there, do it, and find out what feels normal. I'm going to go ahead and pop on the other cover. Here's all 6 of those screws from earlier. I'm going to start reinstalling those with a 2.5mm hex driver. And I pressed the two sides of the casing together. A little bit of marine grease squeezed out, so I'm just going to wipe that off so it doesn't make a mess all over the place. And that's the front differential rebuilt. It feels smooth. The open diff feels stiff, which is good.